Welcome everybody. I'm Des Gasper. I'm here with my colleague Helen Hinchins and student in the migration program at Erasmus University, Fleur Buggerman. Thank you for your interest in ISS and in our migration major in the master's program. I'm going to give you a presentation and sometimes I'll refer to Helen and Fleur, and they will also say much more later in the open discussion section. So the first picture you can see ISS here in the city of The Hague. That's our building. And the next picture is telling you something about what ISS is, which is an institute for students from all over the world. It's a postgraduate school of international development studies, which is now 65 years old. I'm going to say a little bit about ISS, and then second about the migration major in our masters, then thirdly about the 4 cities in which the program takes place, which is one of its special features: Leiden, Delft, Rotterdam, and The Hague. And then last section, I'm going to talk about migration research at ISS and studying migration in ISS. So ISS is 65 years old, and it's for the last almost 10 years now, we are part of Erasmus University Rotterdam as a university institute. Previously, we were a self-standing inter-university graduate school. Now we are the equivalent of a small faculty within Erasmus University Rotterdam. So we're in the city of The Hague. Erasmus University is largely in the city of Rotterdam, but they are sister cities. For many purposes, they cooperate or even treated together, and they're just about 20-25 kilometers apart. As a graduate school, we do MA and PhD programs, and we have about 170, 180 MA students typically per intake. The intakes overlap, and that's one of the interesting features. So you will get to meet 3 groups of students if you study here: the outgoing, your batch, and the incoming. And there's a big PhD group of around 100 researchers, and of course we as academics are engaged in our own research in many areas. So ISS is sort of nestled in a system where we are school within Erasmus University. Erasmus University cooperates with the other universities in South Holland, and this master's program in migration reflects that. So we have what's called LDE, the partnership of Leiden, Delft, and Erasmus universities for many purposes. That's our bigger home. Another home is our city, The Hague. I'll say a little bit more. You probably know it's the capital of the Netherlands, but it's also in many respects an international capital for international law, for many issues around global justice. So we have the International Criminal Court based in The Hague, as well as the International Court of Justice and many other organizations. We have project partnerships with universities in many places, and both for teaching and for research. In the slide, you can see some of the countries listed. And Our student intake is also typically from 50, 60, 70 countries each year. So it's really diverse, and you get the world in one location. Secondly, let me tell you about the migration major within our MA program. The MA program is generations old. It evolves. Currently, we have these 6 majors, and migration and diversity is the new addition. So we're starting up this track. It'll have courses shared with the LDE, Masters in Governance of Migration and Diversity, and other courses which are ISS courses as part of doing your Masters in Development Studies. So migration and diversity figures within the ISS program, and now if you look at the program structure, you'll see it figures also within, on the right-hand side, the joint Masters LDE organized. So there are 2 parts of what you would study if you come here. You would do courses required to fulfill a Master's in Development Studies from ISS, development theory, research methods, option courses, and your research paper. Within research methods, you also have optional choices, so there's quite a lot of choice. It so happens, fortunately for us, that many of the research methods courses are taught by our migration staff. I think the majority of them, and so you'll often find a link there. And then on the right-hand side, you see 6 courses which are part of the Leiden-Delft Erasmus Corporation and delivered from the different participating departments. I've highlighted 2 in bold in the slide because the bottom one, Migration and Development, has a longer title, but we can say Migration and Development is the ISS existing course, which our students take and which is now followed also by students from the other partners. And there's a cross-cutting course delivered in a cooperative way by the 5 partners, 3 departments within Erasmus University, including ISS, department in Leiden and a department in Delft. And that is the Governance of Migration and Diversity course, which is the linking course. So in the next slide, you see something about how that course operates. I just highlight this one because it has the character of linking the others. And the others are history, politics, sociology, development studies, and urban design. And it links them with respect to the theme of governance, stressing the way many different actors are involved, which are national governments, local governments, migrant organizations, employers, trade unions, migration brokers, the families of migrants in origin countries, many groups within many societies. And it's a course with quite an open sort of format, a lot of visits to get feel of different worlds within this chain that migration involves. The migration and diversity track as a whole we can say is looking at movements of people of many types. So in labor migrants, also refugees, also movements for other reasons, family reasons. And it's looking at the causes and consequences, including the issue of the long-term relationships within societies that become increasingly diverse. So the theme of integration, or how do more complex societies now cope with their increased complexity. And there's conflict involved, which has many possible responses. We see antagonistic responses, we see responses that try to build a new type of society. Let me, in the next slide, a Leiden Delft Erasmus major. Let me say something about a special feature of this program, because it involves the cooperation of 3 universities and 5 departments. You have a more interesting life, shall I say, than in a normal program. You will take courses in a number of locations. They're all quite close to each other. In a minute, I'll ask Fleur to say something about what this involves. I want to underline, I think this is an enriching experience. Each of these cities in themselves is very interesting. I'll say more. Each of the universities is interesting, intellectually dynamic, has a lot to offer. And you will, as a result of this structure, you'll be mixing with not only the students from outside Europe, who you will find in ISS, but you'll be mixing with students from mainly inside Europe, from the Netherlands, but also from many other European countries. And I think that's an important element, not just for your general sort of exposure, but also in the context of learning about migration. It's good to mix with this variety of people, and you get plenty of that in this program. Fleur, would you want to add a little bit on this complicated setup that we have?
Of course I will. Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Fleur. I'm a student myself in Rotterdam in Public Administration Department. As you might think now, that the cities are very far apart, actually the Netherlands is really, really small, and it's not really that complicated to be able to move from one city to another. We ourselves, as students, live in different cities since we study in different tracks, but we have a very good network among ourselves, which involves traveling together from one city to another. So if you don't have a student card with which you can travel from one city to another for free, if you travel with a student from the Netherlands, you can get a 40% discount. So this quite involves the network that we established among ourselves. And it, as Des said earlier, it really adds to the feeling of studying in the Netherlands. These are 3 very prominent universities and 3 beautiful and different among themselves cities. So I would really, really recommend, of course, because I'm in the track, I would really recommend to study at ISS in the new track of human development and be able to travel. It's also a gift in a way.
Because the ISS track begins only next year, that's why we've asked Fleur, who's in the LDE program, which is running already and knows it from the inside, to bring in her experiences. So you can see some pictures now of the range of cities you will experience if you join the program. And Leiden and Delft, I think we can honestly say there's nowhere more beautiful in the Netherlands, and maybe they're as good as what you can find elsewhere. These are real jewel cities with In the case of Leiden, an ancient university, the oldest in the Netherlands. And in the case of Delft, it's a modern university, which is, though, just 2 or 3 kilometers from the city centre. It's walking distance, in fact. Then the next picture is a different sort of city, Rotterdam, which is where Erasmus University is centred. And Rotterdam prides itself, for a long time it was the biggest port in the world. It's the biggest port in Europe, and it's one of the global giants, and that's part of its character. It's a port city, so it's trade-oriented, it's migrant-oriented. It's a modern city in a different way from Leiden and Delft, because it's rebuilt after destruction in the Second World War, and it's also consciously profiles itself as the sort of modern leader amongst Dutch cities. When you go to Erasmus University and go up to top of one of the tower blocks, there's several very big buildings there. This, in fact, is not so different from the view you get. You see the great river and the bridges and the city centre on the horizon. Not very far. The Hague, where we are, ISS, is again a different sort of city. It's a medium big city. It's the national capital. The picture shows you the national parliament. And that for long has been the classic picture of The Hague. But The Hague has also changed dramatically in the past 20 years. And it has its Rotterdam's face also. But it also has things that Rotterdam doesn't have. As you see in the next picture, it's the center of international legal institutions of great importance. The Disneyland-looking palace is the International Court of Justice, known as the Peace Palace. There's other big institutions of this type. And it has the sea. It's a city on the sea, and it has not just a beach, it has endless beaches. So the beaches just go on forever. And The Hague is a pleasant city to live in. It's a capital city with all the facilities of a big city, and the special things that happen in capital cities. And at the same time, it's a seaside resort, and it's close to several other interesting cities. Now, finally, and at some point in this also I'll ask Helen to add about the nature of being at ISS in relation to migration studies. And I'll mention the sorts of staff who are here and the sort of work we've been doing, which covers a number of things, including those beyond what I will mention now. So a couple of book covers there illustrate big research projects which we did in recent years, involving, now if you move on to the next picture, this comes from one of those projects, involving networks of migration researchers from all over the world. In that picture you have, here's Helen in the front row, but you have people from West Africa, various Latin American countries, South Asia, Southeast Asia, China, as well as European researchers. And there were many others involved besides those who came for this particular workshop. So we've been doing fairly large-scale cooperative work for many years, and we're now intensifying our involvement in teaching. Our work covers all types of migration, and integration issues. So it's also about intra-national migration. One of our colleagues, Mahmoud Maskoub, has worked a long time on migration within China, which is the biggest movement of all, as well as international migration. Different people here work, and or the same person works at different times on labor migration, on refugees, family migration, etc. Helen will be telling us more about the refugees flows, which she has been studying, in fact, for much of her career. We cover all continents, and including Europe. So our focus is not only on migration to Europe and integration in Europe, and in that respect, we complement the partner schools who are more Europe-oriented, though not exclusively. We take a global perspective. We like to say we take a people perspective, so understanding the situation of the migrants and also those they affect. And, as mentioned already, our staff and students come from everywhere. Next slide, it lists some of the staff, and I'll just take one or two names. So Mahmoud Maskoub is a colleague originally from Iran, was a refugee after the revolution. He's a labor economist. He has worked a lot on Iran, on China, and in recent years in Ghana. I think, Helen, maybe it's a moment for...
Well, yes, no worries. I can say something about myself and Jeff Handmaker in particular. Jeff Handmaker is a lawyer who worked in South Africa and worked on issues to do with Palestine, for example, especially around refugee advocacy. So we share an interest in how do you advocate effectively for refugee rights. Refugee rights, of course, require some slightly different tools, particularly legal tools, that may not always be as relevant to migrants because refugees have their own law, as it were, the 1951 Refugee Convention. So, you know, how is that convention faring? Is it being implemented? Those are the kinds of issues we look at. But as Des says, in different parts of the world. So we are interested in what's going on in Europe, the recent crises, but we have a more global perspective on this as well. So, for instance, we're interested in the fact that 95% roughly of refugees are actually in developing countries. So, and students are also working on a range of topics concerning refugees, everything from the camp in Cali to, say, the closure of refugee camps in Kenya. So those were two of the essays that we had this year. So we've got a lot of scope, I think, for looking at the interface between migration and refugee studies.
I'll mention one more name in that list. That's Kees Piekaert, who's a social movements scholar, and currently he's leading a research project on diasporas and on their political involvements in relation to country of origin, which is often very important. And he's coordinating a program that involves looking at these diaspora in relation to home countries for several different countries. ISS staff cooperate within the umbrella of Erasmus migration research, and there is a Erasmus Migration and Diversity Institute, which is been launched to formalize and consolidate that work, because there's work on migration going on in most schools within Erasmus University, for example, the law school, as well as sociology and public administration and others. Then, final points. I want to say this is a particularly interesting time to study migration. It's an issue which is more and more in public consciousness, affects huge numbers of people, not only the 250 million who are officially defined as migrants, but most other people, because it's those who are left behind, those who are in the countries of destination, those in the countries of transit. And it's a time where, apart from the controversies and conflicts and tragedies that we see in the newspaper headlines, there are also major attempts to move in the area of migration to some international agreements, which is something that has been blocked for decades. So in this slide you see reference to the so-called New York Declaration of a few months ago, making a commitment to, within 2 years' time, establish global compacts, intergovernmental agreements on refugee movements and on migration of other types. And
Can I
so
interrupt you there, Dennis?
go ahead.
Okay, clearly it's taken about 8 years for the Obama administration and other kind of social democrats to get that agreement on the table. I'm not suggesting that it's going to be shelved, but I think we're also interested in the program, in what's going on with a move to the right, not only in the US but also in Europe. So, you know, if you're interested in I mean, Des already mentioned the presence of conflicts. Conflicts, to my mind, is not quite what it is, but it's certainly the rise of the right. And that's something which I think the program at the moment may not yet be tackling, but it's certainly something we want to tackle with students. Yeah.
May I add to that? That is actually being tackled within the politics course.
Yeah.
Within the course of politics, we study, amongst others, populism and the rise and fall, and the relation to migration.
So this is a particularly interesting time. Rising movements, rising tensions, rising opposition, and also a rise in attempts to reach international agreements. And we'll see. Well, we want to help you look at that and also give you tools to participate in and understand what's going on. So the next slide is showing one of the things that's happened recently that's rather interesting, the International Organization for Migration. In an unusual setup, the main international organization in this area is not part of the UN system until last year. So just a few months ago, it has officially become a so-called related organization of the UN, and it fulfills the function in de facto of the migration organization in the UN system. Lastly, if you come to ISS, we pride ourselves on being a learning environment which is enriching, which involves a lot of learning from your colleagues, a lot of learning from their experience. Most of them have many years of work experience, but all of them have diverse life experience from different countries, different social milieu. And what you see in the slide, even we've studied this type of learning, and there are a couple of books which try to explore that and try to make us as teachers also be more aware and supportive of those informal processes of learning, which are equally important as the formal processes in the classroom. So, remaining slides are a list of some contact pages, and a big thank you for joining the webinar and for having an interest in possibly studying migration at ISS.
Okay, so now we come to the part where the prospects have questions. There are a lot of questions about funding opportunity. Because the program is relatively new, some of the funding opportunity, for example, World Bank, particularly there are two prospects asking about this particular scholarship, whether they can apply for it or not. Do you have any answers for them, or any other scholarship for the matter?
Well, these things change year by year, so that's something where people need to check with somebody, an expert who's up to date. And there are addresses within ISS also of people to contact, including yourself,
Yes.
I think, Darren.
Yeah.
Also, other desks within ISS can give expert advice. Plus, on our webpage, there is a special space with advice, up-to-date advice about a whole set of possible scholarship opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Des.
You can also check, just for information, really. You may be interested in applying for the World Bank. I mean, ISS does qualify collectively for World Bank scholarships, but there's, as Des says, their specific priorities might vary year on year. But you can also check the Erasmus website, which has an English version of some general advice on funding too. So we've always got those two options. In fact, you can check all four: ISS, Erasmus, Leiden, and Delft, because we all have our offices that try to help students with funding. So there'll be information on every website. It gives you more options.
Yeah. A question related to that is, are there any full scholarship available if I'm a refugee?
I'd like to answer that question if possible.
Yeah.
Okay, what's happened is that many institutions, many foundations, obviously because, especially with the humanitarian crisis in the Mediterranean, if you can call it that, with large numbers of people swimming, boating, struggling in the snow, it's prompted a lot of academic institutions, I think across really internationally, to think why should we not have, for instance, a scholarship for a refugee, or why don't we focus on actually making it possible for refugees to upgrade their skills? Those who studied journalism in Syria could maybe study journalism in the Netherlands, and then they can go back to working at the level they worked at before. That kind of thing. Now, there's this early days, so these things do take time, but Erasmus is committed to having such a fund. At the moment, it's still being discussed, so I don't think that for this year coming it's going to be available, but we hope that within, say, 12 months' time, the provisions for application for those scholarships, 1 or 2 or 3, I don't know how many, would be online. So if you find nothing online, it's still worth sending a letter to someone, an email to someone, inquiring whether they're aware of anything. Within Rotterdam, for instance, there are foundations which are interested in funding refugees, which may be private foundations, which I may not know about, or we may not know about, but which the student office may be aware of, who would be willing to consider special applications. Whether they fund 100% is another matter. I can't say that.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. There's 2 prospects who actually have been admitted for a major at ISS, but are wondering if they could take the migration and diversity track as well, or change.
They can change.
They can change.
They can just come and change.
So they have to come here first, and then they change. Okay.
Subject to, of course, if their sponsor has
Agreed.
conditions.
Okay. Career options. What are my career options after I have graduated from the migration and diversity track?
All sorts, I think. Of course, your career options also depend on what you've studied before, what you've done before. But there are many growing spaces where organizations are looking for people who don't just have a casual knowledge from newspapers of issues of migration, refugees, integration. I think that it would apply in most countries. In the case of taking a migration track in ISS, it's a major, it's within a bigger master's on development studies. So you're taking other courses also, and how those fit into your career plans depends on you, where you will try to tailor that combination of courses to build on and add to what you have already in your professional and academic toolkit. So there's no single answer, because we are deliberately catering for a range of people. And I can see that in the applications I've been dealing with. There are a variety of interests and career paths, and we aim to, and that's what we've been doing for decades, we aim to help people add to what they have already, and in many cases also to make a change of emphasis in their professional profile.
And perhaps if I can just add to that, which is to say that we don't assume, in fact, I think in migration studies we could not assume that people will necessarily go back to work in the same country or profession in which they were before. I mean, I think studying something like this in an environment like ISS can actually open up all sorts of new ideas for people. So we do have students who for various reasons end up staying in The Hague or in the Netherlands, or going to the UK and working in perhaps some justice institution on victim reparations, and there's I think no reason why, for instance, European students shouldn't think about slightly broadening their horizons after doing a course like this. So not necessarily to work in migration only, but to work on even business issues from a multicultural perspective. So I don't think all students will go into, say, the humanitarian sector or necessarily migration law, etc. But they'll be much more aware of how what we call diversity shapes the world.
Might I add to that we currently see this already happening in our GMD master course. I myself, for example, I have a background in healthcare, in healthcare science, and I apply everything related to migration and diversity onto the healthcare perspective, which also provides for great input in discussions we have in classes, for example, since it broadens up a new perspective for most students. We see it now already happening since it's March. We're starting our theses. And many different thesis subjects are rising at this moment, but people are also getting an internship or applying already for traineeships. And this happens in a broad variety of companies, governments, NGOs already. So you have lots of opportunities, and there's great guidance. All the teachers are very, very eager and open to help you. So don't hesitate for that matter.
Right. Thank you. Question related to admission. People are curious because it's a new subject, so they want to know how many people will be joining or might be joining for this class, or have already joined. Do you expect?
Well, we can't predict because it's new. It will be relatively small to begin with. It depends what people can get funding. But remember, first of all, people are part of LDE shared migration track. The current batch has 20 students, and we're anticipating it will grow next year. So let's say it's 30 students next year. So there's already a peer group of students from the other departments involved who are in this study track. Then, within the ISS program, where students are also doing courses of other types, there are the other 160, 170 master students. And in the ISS migration course itself, there are ISS students, there are other students from Erasmus University, so who aren't following a major, but are taking an option course in migration. So there are plenty of people around.
Thank you, Des. There's a question, a very specific question from a prospect actually. What is the difference between a migrant and a refugee?
Okay, the difference is not about a human being. A human being who crosses a border is both a migrant and or a refugee, but the difference is actually legal. Migrants have various provisions, which Des has provided you some links to. They have an agency responsible for them or for regulating migration affairs. That's the IOM. The UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and underfunded, the poorest body of the UN, incidentally, has been a member of the UN since the beginning, and at least since 1951, so when the Refugee Convention was first agreed. Now, the Refugee Convention applied first only to Europe, and believe it or not, it took till 1967 to extend it to the rest of the world. But it is international. So the difference is really legal. If you cross a border through a fear, with a well-founded fear of persecution on some grounds or other, you are a refugee. If a country accepts you as such, you become a refugee. However, many people are actually asylum seekers. Many people are rejected refugees who may even end up undocumented, they may be stateless, etc., etc. So there are very many categories of migrants who are aspiring refugees, if you want to call it that, but who don't necessarily get permanent refugee status anymore in the world. So within the EU, there are provisions that are separate to cover refugees and migrants. Most countries also have slightly different regimes for a refugee compared with a migrant, although that is not always the case.
Thank you, Helen. Some questions for you, Fleur. Can you please explain the kind of activities that occurs during your class?
Yeah, one of the things that Des mentioned were the site visits, and these are especially of interest within the overlapping course Governance of Migration and Diversity. Each of the key teachers from the institutes organized one site visit. With Des, for example, he took us to the IOM, which was great. Yeah, it was really great to meet the director of such a great institute in the Netherlands, Cited, who is open and opens up to us to talk about issues that would otherwise have more masqueraded within the media, since we are students that really want to tackle issues and really are open to it. We also visited an asylum seeker center, for example, and we went to a neighborhood here in The Hague called Transvaal, and visited it, walked through it. We're guided with one of the persons from the municipality who is responsible for it. So those are the activities we undertake. Afterwards, we reflect upon them. We apply the knowledge that we've been taught on it. And also we enter a symposia towards each other. We have discussions held in class, and of course there are the lectures, for example. And another activity that's really, really important for us to tackle as students is to be able to reflect upon each other's works. Mm-hmm. So for example, when we write papers, or now with the theses, we are being taught how to reflect upon each other and learn from each other. Mm-hmm. And we have responsibility to shape the program, sort or less. Our input is really valued by the teacher, since it is, as mentioned earlier, a new program. But that gives you a form of responsibility, and it gives you a great opportunity to work on a program and to be sort of a pioneer. Mm-hmm. And it feels great. That's also an activity. Yeah.
Thank you, Flo. Another question about internship possibilities.
Yes, especially for international students then?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there are great opportunities. One of our students actually now doing an internship at the IOM. Mm-hmm. She started there today, so I'm really curious how she's doing. And together with a group of students, we are currently developing a project for the Dutch government, Ministry of Social Affairs. And that also includes, we also include international students in it. So you are developing a project for an international government, which is really cool. And the teachers, as I mentioned earlier, are really open to help you to find internship possibilities. So yeah, there are a lot, especially for international students, since the Netherlands has quite a lot of international institutions which are related to migration and diversity, and always are in need for internationals. Yeah.
Thank you, Flo. 2 more questions. They want to know about accommodation and transportation more in detail. For example, because they'll be traveling to 3 or 4 faculties, they want to know where is the best place to stay, and they want to also know if the transportation will be covered by ISS or not.
Okay. Is the transportation covered by ISS?
No, but the transportation costs will not be very major. Fleur can say more about that. And we'll try and make a budget estimate and put it on the website. But these cities are very close to each other, and the traveling is for the 4 or 5 other courses that you take in the partner institutes. Let's say it's 5 courses. But most of the studying is done in The Hague, by far, and the place to live, normally, sensible place to live would be The Hague.
Yes, you can live in Transvaal, where I live, because it's a lot cheaper. To be honest, if you have any contacts here in The Hague, it's worth asking early on about renting rooms. You do have to register at the municipality. You can't rent a room informally in the Netherlands. It's not possible. That person has to agree to let you register as a tenant, but it's really worth thinking about living in town, especially if you're doing this major, because you don't really want to live in student accommodation if you're trying to work on issues of migration. You want to really live in a neighborhood, and I suggest Transvaal is great. It's nice and central. It's close to all the major attractions, and it's on all the main tram lines. So do think about living in the city rather than living in the hall. You may even save some money that way. That would be my recommendation. But however, if you're not sure about that and you feel you'd like to live in more of a community setting, then we have accommodation very close to the ISS. It is not cheap, but it has been recently refurbished, so it should be up to standard.
Yeah. So you have anything to add?
Yeah, I have something to add to that actually. We already thought of establishing a network for new incoming international students next year to help you to set up a little bit in the cities where you will go and live. For example, we have currently 2 students living in The Hague, and they might leave next year and want to subrent their rooms to you. For that matter, we can help you. Of course, I assume actually that you all have Facebook. It's a really good possibility to go to Facebook. Also, maybe try websites on Facebook as Commodity Market NL, Commodity Market Rotterdam, Commodity Market The Hague, since there are multiple rooms available on those websites.
There's also looking for a room in The Hague.
Oh,
Facebook.
yeah.
Yeah, that one too. Yeah.
Those things are really great.
So, yeah, they're good.
We can help you set up
That's
for
nice.
sure. Yeah, of course.
That's integration.
Nice. Thank you. Last question. Can they find a job while studying here to pay for the transportation costs, for accommodation or whatnot? Is it possible?
They can, but they can only work around about 10 hours a week. There's a number of jobs near the ISS that students do. They do lunchtime supervision at a school nearby. That's 3 or 4 times a week at lunchtime. It's not that much pay, but you don't do more than 10 hours a week, so it works out quite well. And other people maybe want to have some babysitting or a weekend job. If you're looking more for something paid that's in a professional sphere, it's going to be difficult to combine with your studies because the only free time you really have is weekends. So yeah, these jobs tend not to be necessarily at the level you might expect to be working once you graduate. They're just jobs to make a bit of extra cash. And occasionally students work in the institute doing very small research tasks. But it is tricky. We have to be very strict about contracts and things like that. So it's not as easy as it once was just to have a few hours work in the academic setting.
Well, that's all the question, but there is one comment from one of the prospective students from Ethiopia. She said that Ethiopia accepts more than 500,000 refugees from Sudan, South Sudan, Eritrea, and Somalia. She said that she really hoped that she will join ISS and for this MA track in the coming September. And she said thank you very much. And she says thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for your attention.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, with that we conclude our webinar presentation on the migration and diversity track. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Des, Flo, and Helen for being the presenter for this major.
Thank you for setting that.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.